I'm Alex, 28, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one to take care of my younger siblings while my mom searched for love. When she announced she was pregnant again, this time for the eighth time, it was the final straw. Something inside me snapped. I had always thought I would be the responsible one, but I realized it was time to finally put myself first. So I packed up my things and moved out. I never expected the fallout would be so extreme or that it would set off a chain reaction that would forever change everything about our family dynamic. Before I get into all that, let me give you some context. Growing up in a cramped house in the outskirts of Denver was never easy. It was always loud, chaotic, and cramped, but manageable until Dad left when I was just 12. From then on, my mom had to work long hours to make ends meet. She'd wait tables during the day and clean offices at night just to pay the bills and keep food on the table. As the oldest, I naturally stepped in. But what began as simply helping out now and then slowly turned into a full-time job. I took on a role I wasn't prepared for, becoming more of a parent than a sibling. My younger siblings, Jacob, 16, Ella, 14, Sam and Lucy, both 11, and little Mia, who was just 5, are good kids, but they needed constant attention. They required a lot more care and patience than any of us expected. By the time I was 13, I was already the one cooking most meals, helping with homework, and trying to keep the house from falling apart. I learned to balance the checkbook, and I was the one who made sure the bills got paid, even when things got tight. When I turned 15, I got a part-time job and became the family chauffeur, driving everyone to school, appointments, and practices. My childhood was over before it ever had a chance to begin, and that's when the resentment started to grow. At first, it wasn't obvious. It wasn't something I'd readily admit to myself. I loved my siblings, after all. I cared about them deeply. But there was a deepening frustration that I was no longer living my life. Every dream I had was shoved aside. Every plan was postponed indefinitely. All I ever heard from friends were stories of high school dances, weekends away, and dreams for the future. Meanwhile, I was home with my siblings, wiping up spills and handling tantrums. I watched as my friends left for college while I stayed behind. They posted pictures from dorms, went to music festivals, and got internships. And here I was, stuck, still living at home, still taking care of everyone. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. I wasn't Alex, the kid with big plans. I was Alex, the unpaid nanny. But everything changed the day my mom told me she was pregnant again. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It started like any other hectic family dinner. I had made spaghetti, the only meal I could make that everyone agreed on. Mom had texted earlier to say she was bringing her new boyfriend, Greg, to dinner. That wasn't unusual. Greg had been around for a while. What was unusual, though, was how excited my mom seemed. I knew something was up. When she and Greg finally arrived, their smiles were so wide I couldn't help but feel a twinge of suspicion. Mom was practically glowing, and Greg had his arm around her waist like he was her knight in shining armor. They sat down, and as we dug into dinner, she announced with an almost too cheerful voice, "I have some exciting news. Greg and I are having a baby." For a moment, the world stood still. Another baby? Another mouth to feed? Another person to take care of? I couldn't comprehend it at first. All I could think was, not again. My siblings reacted predictably. Mia, the youngest, bounced in her seat. "Can I help?" "I'll take care of it," she said, excitement in her voice. The twins, Sam and Lucy, high-fived each other. "We won't be the youngest anymore," Sam exclaimed. But as for me, I was paralyzed. Another child meant more work. It meant more of my time, more of my attention, more of my energy, more of my life. "Are you going to say anything?" my mom asked, looking directly at me. I could see the hope in her eyes. Everyone was excited except for me. I forced a smile. "That's wonderful, Mom. Congrats to both of you." But inside, my heart sank. I knew the truth. This would be another person added to the growing list of responsibilities I already couldn't handle. But no one seemed to notice. After dinner, I found myself talking to my mom in the kitchen. "Mom, I need to talk to you about this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How are we going to manage another baby? This house is already packed with people, and I can't keep doing this." My mom turned to me, a faint smile still on her face. "Oh, sweetie, I'll figure it out. I'll cut back on hours at work, and Greg can help." Don't worry, I'll manage. I shook my head, frustration bubbling inside me. No, Mom, I can't keep doing this. I've put my life on hold for you and the kids. But I'm done. I need to live my own life. Her face fell. What do you mean, done? You're abandoning us? No, I'm not abandoning anyone. But I can't keep being your stand-in parent. I need to finish my degree. I need to have my own future. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing on me, but it felt like a necessary change. It was time. She didn't get it. She thought I was being selfish, but it wasn't selfish to want to live my own life. It wasn't selfish to want to reclaim my future. That night I didn't sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts of what my life could look like if I weren't constantly tending to everyone else's needs. The next morning I told my brother Jake that I was thinking about moving out. Are you sure, Alex? He asked. What about us? What about Mom? I can't do this anymore, Jake. You and the others are old enough to handle things. I'm just one person, and I can't keep carrying this weight. I thought about moving out for weeks, but I finally took the plunge. I found a small apartment not far from home, just far enough to have space but close enough to visit. I signed the lease and started packing. As the days passed, I realized something. This was about more than just me. It was about showing my siblings that they could live their own lives too. They didn't have to follow the same path I had. And most importantly, it was about breaking the cycle of dependence and sacrifice. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the inevitable fallout. I began teaching Jake some of the things I'd learned over the years, how to keep track of the household budget, manage chores, and handle the small crises that seemed to pop up at least once a day. It was hard, but it was time for him to step up. And honestly, it was time for me to stop being the family's caretaker. When I finally moved into my new place, the relief was instant. The quiet, the freedom, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. I didn't have to worry about making meals for everyone or trying to keep my mom's life together. For the first time in forever, my days were my own. I could sleep in on weekends. I could take classes without the constant pressure of juggling 1,000 other responsibilities. It was terrifying, sure, but it was also exhilarating. The first week was the hardest. I missed my siblings more than I expected. I missed the noise, the chaos, the bond that had formed out of necessity. But it was a new kind of freedom, one I wasn't willing to let go of. And I knew deep down that this was the right decision for me. Of course, it wasn't long before the messages started coming. At first, it was just casual check-ins. Jake would ask if I could pick up the younger ones from school. Just for today, he'd ask like it was no big deal. But it was. It wasn't just a simple favor anymore. Every time I went back to help, I was reminded of why I had to leave in the first place. Then one evening, I got a call from my mom. I need you to come back, she said, her voice strained. The house is falling apart. I can't do this without you. It hurt to hear her say that, but I stood firm. Mom, you can do it. You have to. I can't keep sacrificing my life for you. I love you, but I need to live for myself now. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said quietly, I don't understand why you're doing this. I didn't know how to explain it in a way that wouldn't make her feel like I was abandoning her, but I had to try. It's not about you, Mom. It's about me finally getting to live my life. I've given up so much already. I can't keep living like this. There was more silence, and then, finally, she said, I get it. I'm just scared. I don't want to lose you. It was the first real, honest conversation we'd had in years. I didn't know how much she truly understood, but for the first time, I felt like she was seeing me, really seeing me. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into my new life. I focused on my studies, getting more involved in my classes, and adjusting to my new job. The days were full of excitement and challenges, but they were mine. I could make my own decisions without worrying about the weight of my family's expectations. Then came the night that changed everything. It started out like any other evening. I had just finished a late-night study session and was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. It was Jake. His voice was tight with panic. Alex, Mom's in the hospital. Something's wrong with the baby. I need you here. My heart sank. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my keys and rushing to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever. My mind raced with all the worst-case scenarios. But deep down, I knew what had to be done. Whatever happened, I couldn't turn my back on them. Not now. When I arrived at the hospital, the waiting room was filled with tension. Jake was there, holding Mia in his lap, trying to keep her calm. Ella and the twins were huddled together in the corner. Everyone was on edge. I approached Jake, trying to catch my breath. "What's happening?" "They won't tell us much. Mom's stable, but the baby's having some complications. They've got her in tests." The doctor finally came out to speak to us. "Your mom is stable, but the baby's facing some risks. We're not sure yet what's going to happen, but she's going to need complete bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and relief. I couldn't help but feel like this was exactly the kind of thing that had always pulled me back into the role of caretaker. But for once, I knew I couldn't give up everything for them. It wasn't sustainable. As I sat in the sterile hospital room beside my mom, I looked at her in a new light. She was vulnerable, fragile, and for the first time in years, she wasn't asking for my help. She was asking for someone else's. "I'm going to help," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "But I need you to understand something. This is temporary. I'm not coming back full-time. You and Greg will have to step up. You have to be the parents now." She looked at me, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know if I can do it without you." "You don't have to do it alone," I said, my voice softer now. "But you can't depend on me forever." The weeks that followed were a balancing act. I moved back into the house temporarily, but I was careful to maintain my boundaries. I still kept my apartment as my personal space. I still went to school, and I made time for my own life, even if it was just a few hours a week. Mom and Greg adjusted. It wasn't easy, but they made it work. Jake and the others pitched in more, and slowly but surely, our family found a new rhythm. Then one evening, after dinner, Mom called me into her room. "I never properly thanked you," she said, tears in her eyes, "for everything you did, for everything you've done for this family." I sat on the edge of her bed, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't expected. "You don't have to thank me, Mom. I love my siblings, but I can't keep sacrificing my own future. Not anymore." Her voice softened. "I get that now. I should have supported you earlier. You deserve your own life. I see that now." That night, I finally felt like we had reached some kind of understanding. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be done, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weeks that followed were a mix of emotions, from relief to guilt to an overwhelming sense of change. I stayed in my mom's house, helping out where I could, but also taking care to preserve my space. I had boundaries now, something I hadn't allowed myself before. Slowly but surely, I was learning how to balance family in my own life. The house was quieter than it had ever been, and that was both comforting and unsettling. My mom, despite her initial resistance, began to take more responsibility. She started attending therapy, something I'd suggested before, but she'd always brushed off. Greg, surprisingly, stepped up too. He became more involved with the kids, took on more household tasks, and made an effort to be present when things got tough. Jake and I had regular check-ins, and he began to take on more of the responsibility. The twins, though still a handful, were starting to mature, and Mia, sweet little Mia, seemed to be adjusting well, though she still asked for me constantly. I promised her I'd come by every weekend, and I kept that promise, no matter how busy I got. But despite everything, I knew that this wasn't a permanent solution. I had to keep moving forward. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped. I was still close to my family, but I was also living my own life. I started going back to my classes full-time. The day I switched to a full-time schedule at school, I couldn't contain the smile that spread across my face. I was finally taking control of my future. One afternoon, as I was studying for an architectural exam, I received a text from my mom. "Can we talk?" it read. I immediately called her back, my mind racing. "What's up, Mom?" She hesitated before responding. "I just wanted to say, I see what you've been doing, and I'm sorry. I was so caught up in my own stuff that I never really saw how much you were caring for all of us. I was wrong to put that on you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years feeling like I was invisible to her, like I was just the helper, the one who took care of everything. But hearing her admit that she saw me, really saw me, was something I hadn't anticipated. "Thank you, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It means a lot to hear you say that. I've just been trying to find my own way, to live my own life." "I get it," she said, her voice softer now. "And I want to help you do that. I know I haven't been the parent I should have been, but I'm working on it. I don't want to keep holding you back anymore." In that moment, I realized that everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed had been worth it. My family was still imperfect, but they were changing, growing, and I was too. And while I'd always loved my siblings, I finally understood that it was okay to let them go. I could love them from a distance. I could be their brother, their sibling, and not their surrogate parent. A few weeks later, I took another step forward. My new job at the bookstore had turned into a management position, and I was finally able to afford some new furniture for my apartment. It felt like the final piece in the puzzle I'd been working on for years. I made time to go out with friends, something I hadn't done in years. And slowly I began to date again. It was a strange experience at first, learning to be myself, without the constant weight of responsibility hanging over me. But it felt good. I was finally building the life I had put on hold for so long. And through it all, my family began to adjust. They didn't need me to do everything for them anymore. They were stepping up on their own, and I could see it. I was still there for them when they needed me. But the difference now was that I didn't feel like I was drowning in their needs. I wasn't sacrificing myself anymore. Months passed and I graduated. My mom, Greg, and my siblings were all there to cheer me on. It was a bittersweet moment. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and yet a part of me felt like I was leaving something behind. When I looked into the crowd and saw my mom's face, proud, a little teary-eyed, it hit me. Everything I had fought for, everything I had sacrificed had led to this moment. Not just for me, but for all of us. We were growing, we were changing, and we were learning to be a family in a new way. The next year, I enrolled at a prestigious architectural school with a scholarship, and my family, despite all the mess and chaos, was there supporting me. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. We were real. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally starting to live for myself. Not for my mom, not for my siblings, just for me. That was a long journey, but it was worth it. I think my family understood, in the end, that love doesn't have to come with sacrifice. You can love deeply, but you can't give up your own dreams in the process. If you're stuck in a similar situation where family obligations feel like they're swallowing you whole, know that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no, to prioritize your own dreams. It might feel selfish, but it's not. It's necessary, and you'll be surprised at how much healthier your relationships can become when you give yourself the space to live your own life. As time went on, the family continued to find their rhythm without me at the center of everything. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of tension and frustration, but there was a sense of balance now, a sense that we were all trying to grow in our own ways. I kept my apartment as my sanctuary, but I still visited often. Saturdays became our family day. I'd pick up the kids from their weekend activities, take them to the park, or sometimes just hang out at home, watching movies or playing games. We were no longer living in chaos, but we were all learning to live with a new sense of understanding. Mom, Greg, and I also had regular check-ins about the household. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but we were making progress. Greg had stepped up in a big way, which surprised me. He had become someone I could rely on, and he genuinely seemed to care about my mom and her kids. For the first time in a long while, I could see the possibility of a real partnership between them. It was an unexpected shift, but it made me realize that things didn't always turn out the way you expect. Sometimes they turned out better. Even Jake, who had initially resisted the idea of taking on more responsibility, started to rise to the occasion. He was getting more involved in school and his social life, and I could see him growing into a young adult, someone who was ready to carve out his own path. It was bittersweet, though. I realized that, just as I had outgrown my role, so had he. And that made me proud. but it also made me realize how much I had been holding on to. A need to be needed, a need to always be the one holding everything together. Watching Jake step up was proof that I wasn't indispensable, and that was okay. I had my own growth to focus on. I poured myself into my studies, excelling in my architecture program. The more I learned, the more excited I became about my future. I was finally able to see a future for myself beyond my family's needs and struggles. For so long, I had been defined by my role as the caretaker, but now I was starting to define myself as an individual. I was building something for me, not for anyone else. One of the most freeing things I did during this time was start traveling again. I hadn't realized how much I had missed exploring new places until I was able to take a trip for the first time in years. I went to a few architectural landmarks, just to get a feel for what I might be designing in the future. It was a liberating experience, and it reminded me of the dreams I had before I became so caught up in my family's needs. But despite my newfound independence, there were still moments when I was pulled back into family drama. There was one night, a few months after I had settled into my new life, when I got a call from my mom. "Alex, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tight. I braced myself, already knowing what was coming. "What's wrong?" "It's the kids," she began, her voice breaking. "I don't know what's happening, but they're acting out. Jake's not getting along with Greg, and the twins are fighting all the time. I'm so overwhelmed, and I don't know how to handle it." I could hear the panic in her voice, and it hit me hard. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull, the need to drop everything and go back to fix it. But then I took a deep breath. "Mom," I said gently, "you can handle this. You've got this. Jake is growing up, and the twins, they'll adjust. You don't need me to fix everything anymore." "But it's hard," she whispered. "I just don't know if I can do it on my own." "I know it's hard," I said, trying to find the right words. "But you're not on your own. You've got Greg and you've got the kids. You just need to trust them to step up, just like I had to trust you to let me go. It's your turn now, Mom. You can do this." There was silence on the other end, and then she sniffled, wiping away what I assumed were tears. "I know. I just, I don't want to mess up again." "You won't," I reassured her. "And even if things aren't perfect, that's okay. You're doing your best, and that's all anyone can do." After a long pause, she finally said, "I'm proud of you, Alex. I'm proud of everything you've done, and I'm sorry for all the years I asked you to carry everything." Hearing her say that meant more to me than anything else in the world. It was the first time in my life that I truly felt seen by her. I wasn't just the helper, the caretaker. I was her son, and she was proud of the person I was becoming. The rest of the year flew by, with more ups and downs, but each day I felt more secure in my decision to carve my own path. I graduated with my architecture degree, and when I walked across the stage, I looked into the crowd and saw my family there. My mom, Greg, and the kids cheering me on. It was surreal. They had come so far, and so had I. The most beautiful part of this journey wasn't just the degree or the job opportunities. It was the realization that I didn't have to choose between my family and my future. I could have both. I could love my family deeply, but still live my own life, pursue my dreams, and take care of myself first. I still visit them regularly, and we still have our moments of chaos. But now it's different. We've learned to balance our relationships and to respect each other's boundaries. It's a work in progress, but it's real. And for the first time, I feel like I'm living for me, not for anyone else. This chapter of my life is still unfolding, and I'm learning as I go. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't be the person your family needs you to be if you lose yourself in the process. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let go, step away, and give everyone the space to grow, including yourself. As I continued to carve my own path, life gradually began to fall into a rhythm I never thought possible. The guilt that once weighed me down started to lift, replaced by a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced before. I had spent years as the family's pillar, but now I was learning to be the person I was always meant to be, not just for my family, but for myself. Things weren't perfect, of course, There were still moments of conflict, especially when it came to balancing my time between my career, my personal life, and my family. I had learned to set boundaries, but some days those boundaries felt stretched thin. There were times when I missed the kids, especially Mia, who still clung to me whenever I visited. I'd sometimes wish I could just be there for them the way I always had been. But I had to remind myself that my absence was what allowed them to grow and take responsibility for their own lives. The weeks turned into months, and I finally started to feel the distance between us, not as a chasm, but as a necessary space for all of us to breathe. I was growing into my career, receiving recognition for my work, and moving forward with my architectural goals. And while the calls from mom asking for help didn't completely stop, they became fewer. When they did come, I no longer felt like the default person to call in a crisis. I was able to step in when needed, but it didn't feel like my sole responsibility anymore. One night, several months after my graduation, I had dinner with the family. It was just a casual meal, but the conversation turned serious when we started talking about the future. "I've been thinking about what you said," Mom started, her voice hesitant, "about how I used to rely on you so much. And I've realized, I'm sorry, Alex. I should have seen what you needed, not just what I needed." Her words were heavy, but they didn't feel like an apology for the sake of making things better. It felt like a real acknowledgement of how much I had sacrificed. "It's okay, Mom," I said, my voice soft. "I think we've all learned something from this, haven't we? About the importance of taking care of ourselves, not just each other. I know it wasn't easy for you either, but I think we're starting to get it right." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "You taught me that, Alex. You taught me that it's okay to need help, that it's okay to ask for it, and you've given me the courage to make some changes in my own life." The conversation shifted after that, and I could see the shift in her too. It was like we were finally on the same page, understanding each other's struggles, not from a place of obligation, but from mutual respect. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to carry the weight of everything anymore. My family was learning to carry their own load, and I didn't have to bear it for them. Later that year, after much thought, I took a leap I never thought I'd take. I moved even farther away to pursue a prestigious job offer that required me to relocate. It was a hard decision because it meant leaving behind the family I had always been so close to. But I knew this was my next step. I had reached a point in my life where I could no longer be tethered by the past. I had worked hard to get to this moment, and I couldn't let the weight of familial duty stop me from chasing my dreams. As I packed up my things and drove to my new city, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. But it was also a strange sense of peace, knowing that the life I was building was truly my own. The first few weeks in the new city were a whirlwind. I threw myself into work, made new friends, and explored all the things I had missed out on during my years of responsibility at home. I'd never had the chance to experience life in the way I was now. I could go to concerts without worrying about getting home early to help with the kids. I could take spontaneous weekend trips and meet people without constantly feeling like I was on call to fix everyone's problems. Despite all the excitement, I still kept in touch with my family. Mom and Greg were doing better, and Jake had taken on a more mature role, helping out with the younger kids. The twins, who used to be so chaotic, were getting along better. And Mia, she was thriving in a way that made my heart swell. I would FaceTime with her regularly, and every time she'd show me something new. Whether it was a drawing she'd done or a new dance she learned. But even with all the progress, there were still moments when the old guilt crept in. I couldn't help it. I loved them so much, and sometimes it felt like abandoning them was a betrayal. But every time I started to feel that way, I reminded myself of everything I had given up. I had put my own dreams on hold for years, and I couldn't do that anymore. One weekend, I visited home for the first time since moving away. The visit was bittersweet, seeing the familiar faces of my siblings, but knowing I was no longer the one they relied on for everything. Still, the house felt different. It felt more balanced. Mom and Greg were sharing the load more equally, and even Jake had his own life and his own friends. The chaos had diminished, replaced by a healthier, more independent dynamic. That weekend, we sat around the table for a family dinner, just like we used to. It was still noisy, still messy, but it was different. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was just us, learning how to live, love, and grow together. I realized that this was the family I had always wanted, the one where everyone had their own space, their own life, and yet we still came together when it mattered. As I drove back to my new life, I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I needed to do for myself, and in doing so, I had given my family the chance to grow too. They weren't depending on me anymore, not in the same way. They were living their own lives just as I was living mine. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that I had made the right choice. I hadn't abandoned them. I had set us all free. As the months went by, my life continued to take shape in ways I had only imagined. The apartment I had settled into became my sanctuary, the place where I could fully embrace my independence without feeling guilty. I invested time in my passions, learning new skills, meeting new people, and even traveling when the opportunity arose. My job was fulfilling, and the career path I was on was everything I had worked toward for so long. But the most surprising thing, I was starting to feel at home in this new version of myself. I didn't realize just how much I had missed out on until I was able to fully experience the freedom of living for myself. It wasn't just about career growth or academic success. It was about the little things, eating dinner on my own terms, spending weekends exploring the city, and enjoying spontaneous moments without worrying about anyone else's schedule. It was a privilege I had never fully appreciated until I had it for myself. But even with all this freedom, there were days when I felt a pull, a tug back to my family. My siblings, especially Mia, still needed me in ways that I couldn't ignore. Every time I called her, she would ask, "When are you coming to visit again, Tavi?" My nickname for years. I'd promise her I would visit, and each time I'd find myself back in that chaotic house, remembering what it felt like to be their constant caregiver. Yet the dynamics had shifted. Mom had stopped relying on me for everything. She had found a new rhythm with Greg, and they were doing their best to provide for the family, with each of the kids stepping up in their own way. I could see the growth in them, especially in Jake, who had taken on more responsibility without hesitation. Watching him handle things the way I had once done made me feel proud and relieved. But I couldn't help but wonder if I was still needed. Even with everything changing, I sometimes felt like I was betraying them by pursuing my own life. I had grown, yes, but there were moments when I missed being the one to take charge, the one to make sure everything ran smoothly. The truth was, I had a hard time letting go of that role. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when I got a call from my mom that would change everything. "Alex," she said, her voice full of emotion, "I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm trying, but I'm scared I'm failing. I don't want to go back to how things were." I immediately sat up straight, feeling that familiar concern in my chest. "What's going on, Mom?" She took a deep breath before answering. "I know you've moved on, that you have your life, and I should have let go a long time ago, but sometimes I feel so lost. The kids are adjusting, but it's hard without you. I just need to know if I'm doing this right." I sat there for a moment, processing her words. I had made the decision to step away from my own growth, and I had given up everything I once thought was necessary to take care of them. But hearing my mom so vulnerable, she wasn't just my mother anymore. She was someone who was also trying to figure things out, just like I had been. "I don't know what to tell you, Mom," I said quietly. "You've done more than enough. You raised us, and you've learned to rely on others more, which is important. It's okay to feel scared, but that doesn't mean you're failing. We're all figuring it out, and that includes you." "I wish I could have understood that sooner," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to keep asking you to come back and fix everything." "You're not," I said firmly. "You're asking for help, and that's different. We've all got to figure out our own lives now, but it's okay to reach out when you need support. You're allowed to ask for help, just like I did." There was a long pause, and I could feel her emotions pouring through the phone. "You've done more for this family than anyone should. I see that now, and I'm sorry for not recognizing it sooner. I should have let you go. I should have let you live." I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to her words. "I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you, Mom. I'm just living my life, just like you should be doing. We both deserve that." She let out a shaky laugh. "I'm learning, Alex." Slowly. I smiled, feeling the weight lift from my chest. It was the first time I truly felt like my mom and I were on the same page. She wasn't just my parent anymore. She was my equal, someone who was figuring out how to live her own life too. The following weeks felt like a turning point in our relationship. I still visited often, but I was no longer the savior. I was just her son, visiting when I could, offering advice when necessary, and enjoying the small moments with my siblings. The pressure was off, and I could see the family finally standing on its own feet. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was enough. Eventually, I came to accept that the guilt I sometimes felt about moving away wasn't something that needed to control me. Yes, I was no longer the central figure in the family, but that didn't mean I didn't care or that I wasn't still part of their lives. It simply meant I was living my own life, and so were they. I started to feel more secure in my choices. There were still hard days when I missed the old version of myself, the one who always put everyone else first. But those days were becoming fewer and farther between. I had my own life to live, and for the first time, I was allowed to do that. As time passed, I didn't just find my independence, I found my voice. I started to speak up for myself, to put my own needs first, and to acknowledge that I had the right to take up space in this world. The lessons I had learned from my family about love, sacrifice, and growth were no longer a burden. They were a foundation upon which I could build the life I had always dreamed of. I could love my family deeply without losing myself, and that was the greatest gift of all. As the months rolled on, I found myself reflecting more and more on the life I was building, the lessons I had learned, and the family I was slowly but surely reconnecting with on my terms. It wasn't a perfect process, and there were still moments where I struggled to maintain the boundaries I had set, but I was learning. Slowly but surely, I was learning how to be the person I needed to be, without guilt and without sacrificing everything I had for the sake of others. It wasn't always easy to balance everything. I still felt moments of longing when I thought about my siblings. I missed their laughter, their chaos, and the way our family had been before I made the decision to move out. But when I thought back to those days, I also realized how much I had grown since then. One evening, I was sitting in my small apartment, working on a design for a project at my new job, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. Jake, hey, we're all getting together for a barbecue this weekend. Mom says you're coming? I smiled at the message. It had been a few weeks since I'd visited home, and the idea of seeing everyone again in a more relaxed setting felt good. The old Alex might have hesitated, felt guilty, or thought about how much work it might be to juggle my schedule around the family again. But now I was able to look at it for what it was, a chance to connect, not a responsibility to fix things. I quickly replied, I'll be there. Can't wait to catch up. The weekend came, and I drove back to the house where I'd spent so many years of my life. The house that used to feel so suffocating, but now felt like a place where I could just be a part of something, without having to carry the weight of it. When I arrived, the scene was so different from what I'd once known. There were still the familiar signs of a large family, laughter, messes in the kitchen, kids running around, but there was no tension in the air, no frantic rush to get everything just right. Everyone seemed relaxed, content, even happy in their own ways. I walked into the backyard where Mom, Greg, and the kids were hanging out. Jake was playing with the twins, and Mia ran up to me with a big smile. "Tavi!" she yelled, throwing herself into my arms. I laughed and lifted her up. "Hey, little one," I said, kissing the top of her head. "How have you been?" "I've been good. I got an A on my science test," she announced proudly. "Wow, that's awesome. You're a genius," I teased, setting her back down on the ground. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of grilled food, laughter, and lighthearted conversation. Jake and I talked about the future, his plans for college and his dreams of getting into a good program. He seemed so different from the kid I had once carried all that responsibility for. He was stepping into adulthood, and it made me proud to see how far he had come. Greg and Mom were talking on the patio, and I overheard them discussing some new plans for the house, how they were thinking of adding another room to make more space for the growing family. It was a conversation that would have once been mine to carry, but not anymore. Later that evening, as the sun set and the barbecue wound down, Mom came over to me, her face a little more serious than usual. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity, "for everything you did. I know I didn't always show it, but I see now how much you gave up for us." I looked at her, unsure of how to respond at first. It wasn't something I had expected to hear. I had spent so many years feeling unappreciated, overwhelmed, and often resentful. But in that moment, as I saw her standing there, proud of the family we had become, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. "You don't have to thank me, Mom," I said gently. "I love all of you, and I've learned so much from being here. But I've also learned that I can't give everything to others and forget about myself. We've all changed, and that's a good thing." She nodded, her eyes misting over a bit. "I think I understand that now. I've been so focused on everyone else that I forgot to take care of myself. And you. I'm sorry for that." It was the apology I had been waiting for, but not the one I had expected to hear. She wasn't just apologizing for the past. It felt like she was apologizing for herself, for the burden she had unknowingly placed on me all these years. "It's okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We're both figuring it out. And I think we're finally getting it right." We shared a long hug, and for the first time in years, it felt like everything between us had come full circle. We were both learning how to live for ourselves, and somehow, that made our relationship stronger than it had ever been before. As the evening came to a close and I said my goodbyes, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The family wasn't perfect, but we were working on it. We were all finding our way, and that was enough. Driving back to my apartment that night, I realized something important. Family is about connection, not sacrifice. It's about being there for each other, yes, but also about allowing each person to grow and live their own life. In learning how to step back, I had finally given myself the space to live, and it had made all the difference. In the end, I realized that I didn't have to choose between my family and my future. I could have both, and that was the most powerful lesson of all. As the months continued to pass, I found that the balance I had so desperately sought for years was no longer a fragile thing I had to tiptoe around. Instead, it became something I had learned to embrace fully. The space I had once feared to occupy, living for myself without the constant pull of familial obligations, was now a part of me. It felt like a second chance at life, one where I could finally focus on my goals without feeling guilty about putting myself first. But it wasn't just about what I had gained. It was about what I had given to my family and what they had learned in my absence. My mom had started attending therapy regularly, a step I had long hoped for, and with Greg's support, they worked together to strengthen their relationship and take on the challenges of raising a growing family. I was surprised by how much Greg had changed in his role too. He'd stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. He took the lead on handling the bills, the household chores, and even spent more time with the kids. Watching him become a real partner to my mom was a significant shift, one that made me feel more at ease with the changes that had happened. It wasn't perfect, but nothing ever truly is. What mattered was that they were trying, and that counted for something. As for my siblings, I continued to watch them grow in their own ways. Jake had started college and was thriving, making decisions that would set him up for a future he had dreamed of. Ella had joined the school drama club and was excelling in her acting. Sam and Lucy were getting along better, a sign that they too were finding their own way in the world. And Mia, she had started taking piano lessons and had shown remarkable promise. Every time I visited, she would proudly play me a new song, each note filled with the enthusiasm of a young girl discovering the world in her own way. My visits home became less about fixing things and more about reconnecting. We were no longer tangled in a web of unresolved emotions and dependencies. We were learning to be a family in the truest sense of the word, one where each person had space to live their own life, while still supporting each other along the way. There were still moments, of course, when the old patterns tried to creep back in. My mom would occasionally call, needing a little extra support, but now it felt different. She was asking for help because she wanted it, not because she expected me to fill a role that wasn't mine anymore. And that was progress. One evening, about a year after I had moved out, I received a call from Jake. "Hey man," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and anxiety. "I've got something I need to talk to you about." I sat up straight. What's up? Well, he hesitated. I'm thinking about asking Jessica out, but I don't know. I'm not sure how to go about it. Like, I'm not really good at this stuff. I smiled. It felt like a moment I had been waiting for. The day when Jake didn't need me to solve his problems, but instead sought my advice as a peer. You just gotta be yourself, man. If you like her, ask her out. Don't overthink it. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. It's all part of growing up. His relief was almost palpable through the phone. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, bro. You've got this, Jake. Let me know how it goes. That conversation was a turning point. It wasn't about me stepping in to handle things for him anymore. It was about me being there as a supportive brother, just like I had always hoped for. And it reminded me that while I had stepped back from being the primary caregiver, I was still an important part of their lives. But now, I was just Alex. Nothing more, nothing less. A few weeks later, I visited home again for a family gathering. It was another barbecue, nothing fancy, just an afternoon spent enjoying each other's company. As I stood in the backyard, watching everyone interact so naturally, I realized how far we had all come. Jake and Jessica were sitting together laughing. Ella and the twins were playing a board game. Mia was showing Mom and Greg the latest song she'd learned on the piano. It was chaotic, of course, but it was also joyful in a way it had never been before. Mom caught my eye and gave me a knowing smile. How are you doing, Alex? She asked, coming over to me. I'm good, I said, taking a deep breath. Better than I've ever been. I'm proud of you, she said quietly, for everything you've done and for knowing when to step away. I think we've all learned something from you. Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so long feeling like I was the one who needed to fix everything, but now I saw that my absence had allowed all of us to grow in ways we hadn't before. I've learned a lot too, I said with a smile. About myself, about you, about all of us. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace with where we were. Over the next few months, things settled into a new normal. I continued to thrive in my career, working on projects that brought me immense satisfaction. I made more time for myself, whether it was through traveling, meeting new people, or just enjoying the quiet of my apartment. I was building the life I had once put on hold, and it felt more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. But even with everything changing, there was one thing that remained constant: my love for my family. It was different now. Not a love defined by sacrifice, but by respect and mutual growth. I knew that no matter where life took me, I would always be there for them. And that was enough. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, looking out over the city, I thought about how far I had come. I had learned to love not just my family, but myself. I had learned that boundaries were not walls, they were bridges connecting us to healthier, more supportive relationships. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and that was something I would never take for granted again. As the days turned into months, I began to notice subtle but significant changes in my life that I hadn't anticipated when I first moved out. With each new milestone, I realized just how much I had grown, and how much my family had too. The first few months on my own were a whirlwind of newfound independence. I immersed myself in my architectural work, learning the ropes of my new position with excitement and dedication. I started attending industry events, meeting like-minded people, and even took on freelance projects that pushed me creatively. The world had opened up for me in a way it hadn't before. The pressure of always being the one to hold everything together for my family was gone, and it felt liberating. I also began to make connections with people I never thought I'd meet. Through one of my freelance gigs, I met a mentor, someone who had once been in a similar position to mine, caring for a family, putting their dreams on hold, only to eventually find the courage to step out and follow their passion. Our conversations were filled with shared experiences, advice, and inspiration. They reminded me that while I had spent a long time helping others build their futures, I was finally building my own. But even with all the growth and success, there were still moments where I felt conflicted. The old patterns crept in, those moments when I felt like I should be back home, helping, supporting, taking charge. But I had learned something over the past year. I could love my family deeply without losing myself. I could help them, but I no longer had to be the only one who carried the weight. One afternoon, I received a text from my mom. "I need to talk to you." My heart skipped a beat. Over the past few months, things had been smoother between us. There were still occasional check-ins, but they were no longer centered around crises. It wasn't like before, when I'd get calls full of stress and confusion, needing to step in. So when I saw her message, I wondered what was going on. I called her immediately. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She sighed heavily on the other end, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "Alex, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how much I've relied on you over the years. And I just want to say that I see you. I see everything you've done for this family, and I'm so sorry I never acknowledged it before." I was quiet for a moment, trying to process her words. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was the one I had needed. It felt like a turning point, a moment where we both acknowledged the sacrifices we had made and the lives we had each been building. "Mom, I've always loved you all, but I've learned that I can't just give everything to you and forget about myself. You have to live your life too." She was silent for a few moments before speaking again, softer this time. "I know. I think I've been afraid of letting go, afraid of losing you, but I understand now that I have to let you go, just like I had to let Jake and the others grow." Her words were an unexpected balm for the lingering guilt I sometimes felt. I had always felt responsible for my family's well-being, and it had taken me so long to realize that stepping back didn't mean I was abandoning them. It meant I was giving them the opportunity to grow and thrive on their own. "I love you, Mom, and I'm here when you need me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But we both have our own lives to live now." She laughed softly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace in our relationship. "We do, don't we?" The conversation ended on a note of understanding and mutual respect. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of us, one where we no longer saw each other as roles to be filled, but as individuals who loved and supported each other without losing ourselves. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected invitation from Greg. It was a casual invite for a weekend family retreat, something they were planning to do every year now, as a way to reconnect and spend time together. They wanted me to come, not as the fixer, not as the one responsible for everything, but as one of them, a brother, a son, and that in itself was an invitation I couldn't refuse. I agreed to join them. And as I packed my things and drove to the retreat, I realized how far I had come. The past few years had been a journey of self-discovery, and I was no longer afraid to embrace the future, whatever it might bring. The retreat was everything I had hoped for. It was relaxed, peaceful, and full of laughter. We hiked, swam, and spent time talking about our hopes and dreams. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I was just there, enjoying the moments and connecting with my family on a level I hadn't known was possible. Sitting by the campfire that night, watching the flames dance in the cool evening air, I realized that life was no longer about choosing between my family and my future. It was about finding a balance between the two, where I could support them, but not lose myself in the process, where I could love them deeply, but also love myself enough to live my own dreams. As the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey I had taken. I had learned that family didn't have to be a burden. It could be a source of strength. And in that moment, surrounded by my family, I knew that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for all along. This next phase of life wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, understanding, and the realization that we can be everything to our family without losing who we are in the process. I had found that balance. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew it was one where I could live fully, both for myself and for the people I love most. As the years went on, the feeling of balance continued to grow. I had found my place in the world, both professionally and personally. My career in architecture was flourishing, and I was able to take on projects that excited me creatively and professionally. I had made the transition from simply getting by to truly living, and it felt like a new chapter had begun. But it wasn't just my career that was thriving. I began to make new connections in my personal life too. I started dating again, though I was careful not to rush into anything. It was important for me to not lose myself in another relationship like I had in the past. This time I wanted to build a partnership, not an escape from my own life. The process of getting to know someone and learning to balance that with my own goals was an eye-opening experience. And my relationship with my family, while still imperfect, had transformed into something more meaningful. It wasn't just about shared responsibilities anymore. It was about mutual respect and support. My mom, Greg, and I continued to have open conversations about the future. We learned how to communicate in healthier ways, and as a result, our family became a source of strength for each of us, not a place of guilt or unspoken expectations. One of the biggest surprises of this journey was how much I had changed, how I saw myself and my place in the world. When I moved out initially, I thought it was an escape, a way to break free from the suffocating expectations I had put on myself. But what I learned was that it wasn't about running away. It was about running towards something better. I was running toward the person I was always meant to be. And in doing so, I found a deeper connection with my family than I could have ever imagined. There were still moments when I struggled with feelings of guilt. I loved my siblings so much, and there were times when I wished I could go back to the days when I was their protector, the one who made everything okay. But I learned that true love meant stepping back sometimes, giving them the chance to grow and learn on their own, just as I had done. I started to focus more on my own future, building on the opportunities that were now available to me, not just for the sake of success, but for my own happiness. I knew what I was capable of, and I wasn't afraid to chase after the life I had always dreamed of. It was exhilarating to finally feel like I could stand on my own, to build a future that was uniquely mine. And yet, every time I returned home, I felt a deep sense of connection to my family. It wasn't the same chaotic dynamic it had been before. Things were quieter, more peaceful. My siblings had grown into their own identities, and Mom and Greg were building a life together that I was proud to see. We had all changed, and the love between us was no longer conditional. It was a love built on understanding, compromise, and the acknowledgement that we all had the right to pursue our own lives without guilt. The holidays that year felt especially meaningful. Instead of the usual stress and tension that used to accompany family gatherings, there was a warmth in the air. We laughed together, shared stories, and celebrated our individual accomplishments. My mom, once overwhelmed and emotionally distant, was now present in a way I had always hoped she would be. Greg had truly become part of the family, and I could see how much he cared for my mom and the kids. That evening, after dinner, we all sat around the living room together, talking about the year that had passed and what we wanted the future to look like. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride for the family we had become. "I'm proud of you, Alex," my mom said, looking over at me with a soft smile. "I never realized just how much I was holding you back until I saw you find your own way. You've always been strong, but now you're living for yourself, and it's beautiful to see." I looked around the room at my siblings, each of them growing into their own, and realized how much had changed. But more importantly, I understood that the family we were now was built on a foundation of respect for each other's independence. It wasn't about one person sacrificing everything for the others anymore. It was about supporting each other while still pursuing our own lives. As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside for a moment, taking in the cool night air. The stars above seemed brighter than ever. I felt content, knowing that I had found my way. I had come full circle, from the overwhelmed, sacrificing child to the man I was now, someone who had learned the importance of boundaries, self-care, and the power of love without sacrifice. I no longer felt torn between my family and my future. I could have both. And for the first time in my life, I understood that it wasn't just okay to live for myself. It was necessary, not only for my own well-being, but for the health of my family too. I smiled, looking up at the stars, feeling the weight of everything I had learned, and realized that this was only the beginning of the life I was finally ready to live, fully, authentically, and without regret. As the year came to a close, I realized just how far I had come. My life was no longer a constant balancing act of obligations and responsibilities. It was a life I had created for myself, one where I could love and support my family, but also live my own dreams without guilt or sacrifice. The person I had always been was finally free to grow, and in doing so, I had built a life that was truly mine. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time in my life, I was excited about the future. I had found the balance I had longed for, and I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready to face it. And as I stood there looking at my family, laughing, talking, living their own lives just like me, I realized that I hadn't just found my own path. I had helped my family find theirs too, and that was more than enough. Thank you for following along with my journey. If you've ever had to choose between living your life and putting everything aside for those you love, you know how difficult that choice can be. But remember, loving your family doesn't mean losing yourself. It's possible to have both, and sometimes it's the only way we all grow. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more stories like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the StoryVerse channel for more content. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've navigated your own journey of family, self-discovery, and balance. Remember, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the most growth. Keep following your story, and thanks for being part of ours. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story from StoryVerse.